The silence hit me before anything else did. My name is Kes Ilvar, and I have hunted on 6 worlds. I know what a room sounds like when something living is hiding inside it. There is always a sound, a breath held too long, a heartbeat pushing against ribs, the small shuffle of weight shifting from one foot to another. Every creature that has ever tried to hide from me has made a sound, even if it did not know it was making one. This room made no sound at all. My pod moved through the broken corridor of the station in a tight formation, the way we always did before a soft clearing. That is what Command called it. A soft clearing. 1 human. No weapons, no armor, no support. A leftover from a coalition science team that had been evacuated in a hurry. Command told us she had been alone on this station for 11 days. No food drops, no communication. By every measure we understood, she should have already been dead, or close to it, curled somewhere in a corner waiting for something to finish her. I did not expect silence like this. My scent receptors flared open as wide as they could go, drinking in the recycled air, searching for the sour tang of fear sweat, the thing every living being releases when it knows a predator is near. I found nothing. The corridor smelled of rusted metal, old coolant, and dust that had not been disturbed in a long time. Grath, our pod leader, signaled us forward with 2 clicks of his claws against his chest plate. Beside me, Tull kept glancing at his scanner, tapping it twice, 3 times, like he thought it was broken. Nothing, he whispered. No heat signature, no life reading at all. She is human, Grath said. Their bodies run colder than most prey species. The scanner is not broken. I did not answer. I was still listening to the silence, and the silence was still wrong. We had hunted prey animals that knew how to control their scent. We had hunted prey animals that knew how to slow their pulse until it was almost undetectable. But I had never hunted anything that could erase itself completely. The way this station felt erased. It was not the absence of a living thing, it was the presence of something that had learned, somehow, to make itself invisible to every sense my body possessed. My claws itched. That itch is old, older than language, and it only comes when my body understands something my mind has not caught up to yet. It is the itch that tells a young Threnari that the thing in the dark is not prey. It is the itch that tells us to be careful. I tried to push it down. She is 1 human, unarmed, alone. This is what I told myself, as we turned into the next corridor, our 4 bodies moving low and quiet, the way we had been trained since birth to move. Then Tull stopped. He did not raise a hand or make a sound. He simply stopped walking, his whole body going rigid, and the rest of us stopped with him, because that is what a pod does. We move as 1 animal with 4 bodies, and when one part of that animal freezes, the rest freezes too. What is it? Grath breathed. Tull's eyes were fixed on the open doorway ahead of us, into what had once been a cargo bay. In his scanner had gone dark, not broken, dark, as if it had simply decided there was nothing here worth measuring. I don't know, Tull said. I just felt it. I felt it too. It crawled up through the pads of my feet and settled somewhere behind my eyes, a pressure that had no source I could point to. Every instinct bred into my species over 1,000 generations of hunting was telling me the exact same thing, over and over, in a language older than words. Something is watching you. I turned my head slowly toward the cargo bay doorway, and that is when I saw her for the first time. She was sitting on an overturned supply crate, perfectly still, her hands resting open on her knees. She wore simple gray clothing, nothing that could be called armor, nothing that could hide a weapon larger than a fingernail. Her hair was tied back. Her face showed no fear, no hope, no desperation. She looked like someone waiting for a bus, not someone who had spent 11 days alone on a dead station, surrounded by 4 apex predators from another world. Her eyes found mine immediately, as if she had known exactly where I was standing before I had even stepped into view. "You're the young one," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, and it carried easily across the empty bay. "I can tell. You're the only one whose claws aren't fully extended." None of us moved. I became aware, in that moment, that my claws were indeed only half extended, while Grath and the others had gone to full combat posture the instant they saw her. I had hesitated. I did not understand why. "Do not speak to it," Grath said quietly, to all of us, though his eyes never left her. "It is trying to slow us down." "I'm not trying to do anything," she said, and there was something almost amused in her tone, like she found the whole situation mildly funny in a way none of us could understand. "I'm just sitting here. You're the ones who walked into my room. My room, as if this dead cargo bay, this broken station, belonged to her, and we were the intruders." Grath took a step forward, and I noticed something then that made the itch behind my eyes turn into something closer to alarm. She did not flinch. She did not lean back. She did not do any of the things prey does when a predator moves closer. Instead, her weight shifted, so slightly that I almost missed it, from resting to ready. It was the same shift my own body made 100 times a day without thinking about it. The shift a hunter makes. "Grath," I said, my voice lower than I meant it to be. "Wait." He glanced back at me, irritation flashing across his face. "She is one unarmed human. Kess, we clear the room and we leave." "Look at her hands," I said. He looked. Her hands were still open, still resting on her knees, palms up, harmless. But I was not looking at her hands. I was looking at her shoulders, her feet, the angle of her hips, the way every part of her body had quietly arranged itself into a position that could move in any direction at any speed without a single wasted motion. I had seen that stillness before. I had felt it in my own body, right before a hunt. She was not hiding. She was not afraid. She was simply choosing, for now, to stay exactly where she was. "I'm not going to hurt anyone," she said, and for the first time her voice had an edge to it, something sharpened underneath the calm. "But you should know that I am very good at understanding what a person is about to do before they do it. I've had 11 days with nothing to do but watch this station breathe. I know every sound it makes. I know every draft, every shadow, every place a person could hide. She is trying to frighten us with words," Grath said, and he raised his weapon. The moment his weapon came up, something changed in the room. It was not loud, it was not sudden. It was the smallest shift in the air, like a held breath finally being allowed to leave a body, and every instinct in me screamed that the stillness was over. "I tried," she said quietly, almost to herself, and she was no longer sitting on the crate. "I did not see her move. I want to be honest about that, because everything that happened after this moment depends on you understanding that I, a trained hunter of my species, with senses built over 1,000 generations to track motion faster than most creatures could perceive it, did not see her leave that crate. One instant, she was sitting with her hands open on her knees. The next instant the crate was empty, and the air where she had been was still settling. Grath's weapon discharged into empty space. Somewhere behind me, Tull made a sound I had never heard him make before. A short, sharp intake of breath that was not quite fear, but was standing very close to it. I turned, my body already dropping into a defensive crouch out of pure instinct, and I understood, in that single spinning moment, that everything Command had told us about this soft target had been wrong. There was no fear in this station. There had never been any fear in this station. There was only a predator who had been waiting, very patiently, for us to walk into her room. The lights went out a half-second after Grath's weapon fired, and in that darkness, I learned something about myself that I had never known before. My body, trained since birth to hunt in low light, to use darkness as a tool rather than a hindrance, suddenly felt like a disadvantage instead of a strength. Because she was not fighting the darkness. She was using it exactly the way I would have used it. "Grath!" I called out, my voice bouncing strangely off the cargo bay walls. "Fall back to the doorway. Regroup. We do not retreat from one unarmed creature," he snapped back. And I heard him moving, the scrape of his boots against the metal floor, the low growl building in his throat that meant he was preparing to strike at anything that came close. Something struck him first. I heard it, rather than saw it, a sound like a controlled fall, weight meeting weight, and then Grath's growl cut off into a startled grunt. A moment later his weapon clattered across the floor, spinning away into the dark, and Grath himself made a sound I had never heard from him before, a low, confused noise, like he could not understand what had just happened to his own body. "Report," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am," Grath said slowly, "on the floor." It was such a simple sentence, but the way he said it carried an entire world of disbelief inside it. Grath had been hunting since before I was born. He had faced down creatures 3 times his size without losing his footing once. And now he was on the floor of a cargo bay, disarmed by a woman who had not made a single sound that any of us had detected. Tull's scanner flickered back to life beside me, casting a thin blue light across his face, and I saw real unease there, the kind he usually hid behind jokes and confidence. "She's not using the doorways," he said, staring at the readout. "There's movement all through the ductwork above us. I can't get a clean lock on her position, she keeps disappearing between frames." "That's not possible," I said, even as some old part of my brain, the part that had never trusted easy explanations, was already telling me it absolutely was possible and that I simply did not want to believe it. "Do you smell that?" came Syrah's voice from somewhere to my left. Syrah was the quietest of our pod, rarely speaking unless something troubled her deeply, and right now her voice was tight with something close to fear. I drew in a slow breath, and this time I caught it. Not fear, sweat, something else. Something calm and deliberate, almost clean, like the scent had been carefully controlled rather than simply released by a frightened body. It was the smell of someone who had trained their own body, over years, to give nothing away. "She is not afraid of us," I said quietly. "She has never been afraid of us." "Then what does she want?" Tull whispered. Before anyone could answer, the emergency lighting flickered back on, dim red strips along the floor, casting long shadows across the cargo bay, and in that reddish light I finally saw her again, standing near the far wall, exactly where the shadows were deepest, exactly where a hunter would choose to stand if they wanted to see everyone else while remaining half-hidden themselves. Grath was on the ground several feet from her, pushing himself up onto one arm, clearly shaken but unharmed. "I didn't come here to fight all of you," she said, and her voice, even now, held that same maddening calm. "I came here because this station had supplies I needed, and because I was hoping the people who came looking for me would be reasonable enough to leave once they understood I wasn't a threat worth the effort." "You disarmed our pod leader," I said. "I took away a weapon that was about to be pointed at me," she said. "There's a difference." Grath climbed fully to his feet, and even in the dim red light, I could see the fury radiating off him, the particular fury of a hunter who has just discovered, for the first time in his life, that he might not be the most dangerous thing in the room. "You will not walk away from this," he said, low and dangerous. "Grath, wait," I said again, but he was already moving, faster than I had ever seen him move, closing the distance to her in 3 long strides, claws fully extended, every part of his body committed to the strike. She did not run. She stepped into him instead, which was the last thing any of us expected, turning her body at an angle that let his forward motion carry past her rather than into her, one hand catching his extended arm and redirecting it with almost no visible effort, using his own speed against him the way water uses a stone's own weight to move it aside. He stumbled past her, off balance, and before he could recover, she had already stepped back into the shadows, out of reach. "I really don't want to hurt anyone," she said again, and this time there was something almost sad in her voice, buried underneath the calm. "But I will keep doing this for as long as it takes for you to understand that." Tull, standing beside me, had gone very still, and I realized his scanner had finally locked onto something, a shape moving along the upper walkway behind her, and then another, smaller shape near the ventilation grate on the opposite side of the bay. "Kess," he whispered, "she's not alone." My whole body went cold at that. I had assumed, the way Command had assumed, the way every briefing document had assumed, that this was a single-stranded human, isolated and desperate, easy to clear and easy to forget. But the shapes on Tull's scanner were moving with purpose, with coordination, sliding into position around us the exact way my own pod had been trained to surround a target. "There is no support on this station," Grath said, but his voice had lost its earlier certainty. "Command confirmed it, she is alone." "Command was wrong," I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I understood how dangerous that sentence was, how much it meant, how it unraveled everything we had been told about what humans were and what they were capable of. The woman in the shadows tilted her head slightly, as if she had heard me, as if my small admission mattered to her somehow. "My name is Elena," she said, "and I would rather this end without anyone getting seriously hurt. But that choice isn't only mine to make." Sear's voice cracked through our comm channel then, sharp and urgent. "Movement behind me. I can't see. I can't see anything. Something is—" Her voice cut off entirely. Not a scream, not a struggle. Just silence, sudden and complete, the same terrible silence that had greeted us the moment we stepped onto this station, and somehow that silence was worse than any sound could have been. "Seer!" Grath barked into the comm. "Seer, report." Nothing answered him. I turned toward Tull, and in the dim red light I watched real fear settle onto his face, for the first time since we had known each other. Fear that had nothing to do with pain, and everything to do with the sudden understanding that we had walked into something none of us had been prepared for. "She has taken Seer," Grath said, and his voice, for the first time I had ever heard, trembled slightly. "I haven't hurt her," Elena said quickly, and something in her tone told me she was telling the truth, though I could not have said how I knew that. "She's restrained, that's all. I needed her quiet so this conversation could happen without more weapons being drawn." "You call this a conversation?" Grath snarled. "I call it the last chance I'm going to offer," Elena said, and the calm in her voice had hardened into something else now, something with edges. "Your species came to this station expecting to clear out an easy target. You were told I was helpless. You believed it, because it fit what you already thought you knew about my kind. I'm asking you, one more time, to walk away and tell your commanders they were wrong." Grath's claws were still extended, his body still coiled to strike, but I noticed something in the set of his shoulders that had not been there a few minutes earlier. The same hesitation that had kept my own claws only half extended when I first saw her sitting calmly on that crate. "And if we do not walk away," he said, "then we keep doing this," Elena said quietly, "until you understand that walking away was always the smarter choice." Tull's hand found my arm in the dark, gripping it tightly, and when he spoke his voice was barely above a whisper. "Kess, look at her stance. Look at where she's standing. She's not defending this cargo bay. She's herding us toward the exit." I looked, and he was right. Every position Elena had taken since this began, every shadow she had used, every angle of her body, had been slowly, patiently, pushing us backward, away from the deeper parts of the station, toward the corridor we had first entered through. She was not trying to defeat us. She was trying to make it easy for us to leave. And somewhere in the ductwork above us, and somewhere in the shadows along the walls, her allies were still watching, still waiting, still perfectly silent, giving us the exact same choice she was giving us now, one final chance to understand what we were truly dealing with, before something happened that could not be undone. Grath did not walk away. I wish I could tell this part differently, but I promised myself I would tell it exactly as it happened, and what happened is that Grath's pride, the same pride that had made him one of the finest pod leaders in our fleet, would not let him leave a cargo bay, having been beaten by an unarmed creature from a species we had all been taught to see as beneath us. He gave the order to press forward, and Tull and I, bound by training and loyalty, followed him. It did not go well for us. I will not describe every moment of what followed, because the details do not matter as much as the outcome. Within minutes, Grath was restrained the same way Seer had been, calm and unharmed but utterly unable to fight back, his considerable strength made useless against hands that always seemed to know exactly where he would move before he moved there. Tull lasted a little longer, mostly because he stopped trying to fight and instead tried to talk, which turned out to be the only strategy that worked at all, though it earned him nothing but a firm hand on his shoulder and a quiet voice telling him to sit down and stay calm. I was the last one standing, and I understood, watching my pod fall one by one, without a single serious injury among them, that this had never been a fight Elena intended to lose. I also understood something else. She had not wanted to fight at all. When it was my turn, I did not raise my claws. I stood very still in the dim red light of the cargo bay, my pod restrained around me, and I looked at Elena across the open space between us, and I made a choice that went against every instinct bred into my body over 1,000 generations. I chose to listen instead of strike. "You are not going to fight me," she said, and it was not quite a question. "I want to understand," I said. "Before anything else happens, I want to understand what you are." Something shifted in her expression then, something that had not been there during the fight, something almost like relief. "Sit down," she said, nodding toward an overturned crate near the wall. "I'll answer what I can." I sat, aware of Graith's furious eyes on me from where he was restrained nearby, aware of Tull, watching with something closer to curiosity than anger. Elena settled onto the crate across from me, close enough now that I could study her without the distortion of shadow and distance, and what I saw unsettled me more than anything that had happened during the fight itself. She looked tired, genuinely tired, the kind of tired that comes from 11 days without proper rest, without proper food, without the comfort of knowing help was coming. Her hands, when she rested them on her knees again, had small marks and scrapes across the knuckles. She was not some invincible creature immune to hardship. She was a person who had simply refused to let hardship control what she did next. "You keep looking at me like you're trying to solve a puzzle," she said. "I am," I admitted. "Our scanners told us you should be dying. 11 days alone, no supplies, no support. And yet you disarmed 4 trained hunters without raising your voice once." "I wasn't completely alone," she said, "and I wasn't completely without supplies, but you're right, that I shouldn't have been able to do what I just did, not by the numbers your commanders were working from. So let me ask you something first. What were you told about my species before you came here?" I thought about the briefing, the same briefing every pod received before a mission involving humans. That you are physically weaker than most coalition species, slower reflexes, poor natural senses compared to species built for hunting, dangerous only because of your technology, and manageable once that technology is removed. Elena nodded slowly, as if she had heard this exact description many times before, and it no longer surprised her. "That description isn't entirely wrong," she said. "Compared to some species, we are slower. Our eyes aren't as sharp as yours in low light. Our sense of smell is honestly embarrassing next to what you can do if you're measuring us the way you'd measure any other predator, by claws or speed or natural weapons. We come up short every time." "Then how," I said, "did you do what you just did?" "Because you're measuring the wrong thing," she said. "You're measuring what my body has. You should be measuring what my body was built to survive." She leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since I had met her, there was something almost eager in her voice. The eagerness of someone finally given the chance to explain something that mattered deeply to her. "My planet doesn't have many easy predators, not the way you'd think of them. No massive claws waiting in ambush. No venom. What my planet has is distance. Open land that stretches for days in every direction, and creatures that are faster than us over any short chase, strong enough to end a fight in a single strike if we ever got close enough. So for most of our early history, if a human wanted to eat, they couldn't rely on being the fastest thing in the field or the strongest thing in the fight. Then how did your species survive at all?" I asked, genuinely curious now, the earlier fear folding slowly into something else. "We ran," she said simply. "Not fast, not for a short burst, the way most animals do. We ran for hours, sometimes for an entire day, tracking a single animal across open ground, never stopping long enough for it to fully recover, never letting it rest, until eventually it simply couldn't run anymore, and we were still moving. We call it endurance hunting. Our bodies are built for it in ways almost nothing else on our planet is. We sweat instead of overheating the way most animals do. Our legs are built for long distance rather than short bursts of speed. We can carry very little water and very little food and still keep moving long after a stronger, faster creature has collapsed from exhaustion. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over in my mind, and slowly, uncomfortably, pieces began falling into place. "That is why you were not exhausted after 11 days, I said. "That is why your body did not register as a threat worth measuring on our scanners. You were not simply surviving. You were pacing yourself, the same way you would pace yourself across open land, waiting for something to tire before you did." "You're a fast learner," she said, and there was a note of approval in her voice that I had not expected to feel good about hearing, and yet somehow it did. "But that explains endurance," I said. "It does not explain what happened in this bay tonight. You did not simply outlast us. You moved faster than our sensors could track. You disarmed a hunter 3 times your size without visible effort." Elena's expression grew more serious then, and she glanced briefly toward Grath, still restrained nearby, before answering. "There's a second part to what my species is," she said, "and it's the part your coalition never bothered to study properly, because by the time they met us, we'd already built machines to do most of our hunting for us. They saw the tools and assumed the tools were the whole story. They never asked what kind of creature builds tools like that in the first place." "What kind of creature?" I repeated quietly. "The kind that learned to read another animal's next move before that animal had fully decided on it," she said. "Chasing prey for hours means watching it constantly, learning its patterns, understanding exactly when it's about to change direction before its own body has finished the decision. That skill didn't disappear when we stopped needing to hunt for food. It just found new places to live, in how we read each other, in how we read anything trying to hurt us." I thought of Grath's strike, the way she had stepped into it rather than away from it, the way her hand had found his arm at precisely the moment it needed to. She had not been reacting to his movement, she had been anticipating it, the same way she must once have anticipated the movements of some fast, powerful animal on an open plain thousands of years before either of us had been born. "Our coalition classified your species as low threat," I said slowly, "because you did not fit the shape of a predator we already recognized. No claws, no natural armor, no obvious weapon carried on your own body. We measured you against every predator we already understood, and when you did not match, we decided you must be something else." "Prey, usually," Elena said, and there was no anger in her voice when she said it, only a tired kind of patience. The patience of someone who had explained this before and expected to explain it again many times in the future. That's the mistake almost every species makes about us, at least at first. We don't look dangerous by the rules most predators live by. We don't have to. We were never trying to win a fight in one single moment. We were built to win a fight that took all day, and by the time our opponent understood that, it was already too late for them to change strategy. I became aware, sitting there in the dim red light, of Grath's eyes still fixed on me, and when I glanced toward him, I saw something in his expression that surprised me more than anything Elena had said so far. It was not fury anymore. It had shifted into something quieter, something closer to the same unsettled recognition I felt building in my own chest. "You let us find you," I said, turning back to Elena. "In this cargo bay. You could have stayed hidden. Our scanners already told us we could not track you reliably. Why show yourself at all?" "Because hiding forever isn't a plan," she said. "Eventually more of your people would have come, better equipped, more prepared, and eventually the numbers would have mattered no matter how careful I was. I needed your commanders to understand, clearly and immediately, that this station wasn't worth the cost of taking it. The fastest way to do that was to let a pod experience it firsthand and carry that understanding back with them. And if we had simply killed you instead of engaging," I said, the words feeling strange and heavy in my mouth even as I spoke them, "before any of this conversation could happen." Something flickered across Elena's face, then brief and controlled, but I caught it. It was fear, real fear, quickly smoothed back into calm, and it told me something important. She was not invincible. She had simply decided, days ago, that the risk was worth taking anyway. "Then I suppose I would have been wrong," she said quietly. "But I've learned that most creatures, even dangerous ones, prefer talking to fighting. Once fighting stops being easy, I was betting that your pod would rather understand a threat than keep losing to one they didn't understand. I looked around the cargo bay then, at Grath restrained but listening intently despite himself, at Tull watching Elena with an expression that had moved past fear into something closer to fascination, at Seer, somewhere out of sight, but presumably listening as well through whatever restraint Elena's allies had placed on her. And I understood, with a clarity that settled cold and certain in my chest, that everything my species had believed about humanity was built on a foundation that had never been tested properly, because no one had ever survived long enough to test it, or had ever bothered asking the right questions when they did. "How many of you are on this station?" I asked. Elena hesitated for the first time since our conversation began, weighing how much to say, and when she finally answered, her voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "Enough," she said. "Enough to make sure that whatever happens next, your pod leaves this station with the truth, instead of a victory. I'd rather you carry that truth back to your fleet than carry nothing back at all." Somewhere above us, in the darkness of the ductwork, I heard the faintest sound, the first sound I had heard from any of her allies since this entire encounter began. A small, deliberate shift of weight against metal, quiet enough that I almost missed it entirely. It was not a mistake. I understood that immediately. It was a reminder, gentle and controlled, that we were still surrounded, still outmatched, and still, despite everything, being shown more patience and more restraint than any of us had extended to her when we first walked through that door. The sound in the ductwork brought Grath back to life. "How many?" he demanded, straining uselessly against his restraints. "How many of your kind are hiding in the walls of this station, watching us like insects to be studied?" "More than your commanders were told," Elena said, "and fewer than you're probably imagining right now." A section of the wall panel near the far end of the cargo bay slid open without a sound, and I watched my body tensing, despite everything I had already learned, as a man climbed down from the space behind it, dropping the last short distance to the floor with barely a whisper of noise. He was older than Elena, gray beginning to show at his temples, dressed in the same simple gray clothing, carrying nothing that could be called a weapon in either hand. "This is Daniel," Elena said. "He's been watching the eastern corridor since your pod first boarded." Daniel gave us a short, measuring look, the same evaluating stare Elena had given us when we first found her, and I felt that same old itch behind my eyes flare up all over again, stronger this time, because now there were two of them, and my body understood, on some level older than thought, that it was outnumbered in a way that had nothing to do with simple numbers. "They're young," Daniel said to Elena, glancing at Tull and me. "The older one is proud. That's the one who'll be trouble." "I noticed," Elena said dryly. Grath's growl deepened at being discussed so plainly in front of him, but he had already learned, in the space of a single fight, exactly how little that growl accomplished against these two. Another panel opened, this one near the ceiling, and a third figure dropped down, lighter and quicker than Daniel, landing in an easy crouch before straightening into a woman roughly Elena's age, her dark hair cut short, her eyes moving across the room in the same careful, evaluating way the others had. She introduced herself simply as Grace, and said nothing more, content to stand near the wall and watch. Three of them now stood in the open, and somewhere, I knew, more remained hidden, patient and silent, exactly as they had been since we first stepped onto this station. "You called this a soft target," Daniel said, addressing all of us but looking mostly at me, perhaps because I was the only one who had chosen to listen rather than fight. "That word tells me a great deal about what your fleet still doesn't understand about us." "Soft target simply means low resistance," I said. "It does not mean weak. It means the difficulty of the engagement was expected to be low. And now that you've seen otherwise," Daniel said, "what will you tell your commanders?" I did not have an answer ready, and my silence seemed to be answer enough for him. He turned to Elena instead, his expression unreadable. "The others are ready to move if you give the word," he said quietly, clearly meaning something beyond simply leaving the cargo bay. "We don't have to let this pod report back at all." My whole body went still at that, and beside me I felt Tull's breathing catch, and even Grath, restrained and furious, went suddenly and completely silent, the fight draining out of him in an instant, replaced by something far more primitive and far more familiar to every creature that has ever understood, in a single terrible heartbeat, that its life now belonged entirely to the judgment of something stronger than itself. Elena's answer, when it came, was immediate and firm. "No," she said, "that was never the plan, and it isn't going to become the plan now." "They attacked first," Daniel said, though there was no real argument in his voice, more the sound of someone confirming a position rather than pushing against Elena's decision. "They attacked because they were told I was helpless," Elena said. "That's not the same as malice. That's a briefing failure, and briefing failures get corrected when the people who receive bad information survive long enough to report otherwise. Killing this pod doesn't correct anything. It just creates 4 more disappearances for their fleet to avenge, and we both know avenging is a much more dangerous motivation than correcting a mistake ever was." I felt something loosen in my chest at her words, a tightness I had not fully noticed until it began to ease, and I understood, watching her stand there, arguing for our survival against her own ally, that everything I had been taught about humanity, everything the Coalition had built its entire threat classification system around, had been not just wrong, but dangerously, catastrophically wrong. Grace spoke for the first time then, her voice quieter than either Elena's or Daniel's, but carrying easily across the bay. "The pod leader still doesn't understand," she said, nodding toward Graith. "Look at his eyes. He's furious, not afraid. That's going to be a problem later, even if we let them go now." I looked at Graith, and Grace was right. Even restrained, even having lost every part of the fight he had started, Graith's expression had not shifted into the careful respect I felt building in myself. It remained locked in something closer to wounded pride, the particular fury of a predator who has been shown, undeniably, that he was not what he believed himself to be, and who would rather deny that truth than accept it. "I understand perfectly," Grath spat. "I understand that your species hides behind tricks and shadows, because you know, deep down, that you cannot win a fair contest against a true hunter." Daniel's expression did not change, but something in the set of his shoulders shifted, a subtle readiness that I recognized immediately because I had felt my own body do the exact same thing dozens of times before a strike. "There's no such thing as a fair contest," Daniel said calmly. "There's only the contest that happens, and the one who understands the terrain wins it. You walked onto our terrain expecting your terms to apply. They didn't. That's not a trick. That's just the truth catching up to an assumption that was never true in the first place." Tull, who had been silent for most of this exchange, finally spoke, his voice smaller and less certain than I had ever heard it. "Why didn't our scanners detect any of you?" he asked. "Not just Elena. All of you. How does an entire group move through this station without leaving a single reading?" Elena and Daniel exchanged a brief glance, some silent decision passing between them, and it was Elena who finally answered. "Your scanners are built to detect threat signatures your coalition already understands," she said. "Elevated heart rate under stress, specific heat patterns from active predator physiology, the chemical signs of adrenaline preparing a body for a fight. We've spent generations learning to keep our bodies calm under pressure that would send most creatures into a full stress response, because a hunter who panics halfway through a long chase is a hunter who doesn't eat that day. Calm isn't just a mood for us. It's a trained physical state, and your scanners were never designed to flag a threat that refuses to look like one." I thought of the itch behind my eyes, the instinct that had fired the moment we stepped onto this station, an instinct that had nothing to do with scanners or scent readings or any of the tools we had brought with us. It had simply known, on some deep and wordless level, exactly what our technology could not measure. "My instincts recognized you before my equipment did," I said slowly, as much to myself as to anyone else in the room. "Every part of my training told me this station was safe. Every part of my body told me it was not." "That's the part that matters most," Daniel said, and for the first time since he had appeared, something almost like respect entered his voice. "Equipment can be fooled. Instinct built over generations of survival is a great deal harder to fool, because it isn't looking at what a threat has. It's looking at what a threat is. Graff let out a short, bitter sound that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. You speak as though we should admire this, as though being outmaneuvered by unarmed prey is something to be proud of understanding. I don't need you to admire it, Elena said, turning to face him directly, and there was no anger in her voice, only a tired kind of finality. I need you to survive it, and remember it, and make sure the next pod that comes here doesn't walk in believing the same mistake you did. That's not a request for your respect, it's a request for your fleet's survival, whether you're willing to see it that way or not. Somewhere above us, in the ductwork, I heard that same small, deliberate sound again, and this time I understood it clearly for what it was. Not a threat, a signal. An entire hidden network of humans, patient and coordinated and silent, still holding their positions, still watching, still choosing, moment by moment, not to end this the way they easily could have. And standing there in that dim red light, surrounded by proof of everything my species had gotten wrong, I felt the last of my old certainty finally give way, replaced by something far more unsettling and far more true. We had never been the hunters in this room. We had simply been the last ones to realize it. The decision to release us did not come quickly, and it did not come easily. Daniel argued for caution long after Grace had gone quiet, long after Elena had made her position clear, and I understood, listening to him, that his caution was not cruelty. It was the same caution my own pod had been trained to feel toward anything unknown and potentially dangerous. Except this time, the unknown and potentially dangerous thing was us. If we let them go, and they return with a larger force, Daniel said, everyone on this station pays for that mercy. And if we don't let them go, Elena said, we become exactly the kind of threat their briefings already warned them about. We prove every assumption they walked in with. I would rather be misunderstood as harmless than correctly understood as something worth exterminating on sight. In the end, it was Grace who settled the argument, her quiet voice carrying more weight than either of theirs, perhaps because she had spoken so little until now. Let them go, she said, but let the young ones see everything first. All of it. If even one of them carries the full truth back, that's worth more than silence ever could be. I did not fully understand what she meant until Daniel led me, alone, away from the cargo bay and deeper into the station, past sections that our scanners had told us were empty, into a series of rooms that had clearly been converted into something far more organized than a stranded survivor's hiding place. There were supply stores, carefully rationed. There were makeshift training areas, worn smooth by repeated use. There were sleeping quarters, for more people than I had expected, though I was careful not to count too precisely, understanding that some information was not mine to carry back, regardless of what Elena and Daniel had decided to show me. Why show me this? I asked, as Daniel walked beside me through a narrow corridor, lit only by a single working strip of emergency lighting. Because your fleet needs someone who understands the full shape of the mistake it made, he said, not just that one woman disarmed 4 hunters in a cargo bay. That an entire framework for judging our species was built on incomplete information, and incomplete information gets people killed on both sides eventually. We reached a small room near the center of the station, and inside I found perhaps a dozen more humans, all in the same simple clothing, all pausing their quiet work to look up as we entered. None of them reached for anything resembling a weapon. None of them needed to. I understood now, walking among them, that the absence of visible weapons had never meant the absence of danger. It had simply meant a different kind of danger, one my species had never learned to recognize because we had never needed to survive the way theirs had. This is everyone, Daniel said simply. The coalition assumed one weak survivor, what your fleet actually left behind, when it evacuated this station in a hurry, was an entire group of people who had spent years training bodies and minds for exactly the kind of scenario you walked into tonight. We didn't build this readiness because we expected your pod specifically. We built it because our history taught us that readiness is the only thing standing between survival and disappearing quietly into a night that doesn't care whether you deserved better. I studied the faces around that room, and what struck me most was how ordinary they looked. No visible enhancement, no obvious augmentation, Simply people, tired and careful and disciplined, who had turned patience itself into a kind of weapon more effective than any claw or blade my species had ever developed. I do not know how to explain this to my commanders, I admitted quietly. They will not believe a report built on instinct and impression. They will want numbers, weapons counts, tactical data. Then give them the one piece of data they can't argue with, Daniel said. 4 trained hunters entered this station expecting an easy clearing. All 4 left without a single serious injury, and every one of them is now convinced this species was never what the Coalition believed it to be. That outcome, on its own, should be more convincing than any weapons count could ever be. When we returned to the cargo bay, Elena was waiting, and something in her posture had softened slightly, the careful readiness of earlier replaced by something closer to simple exhaustion, the exhaustion of someone who had spent 11 days holding a difficult line and was only now allowing herself to feel how heavy that line had been. "Your pod leader is still angry," she said to me quietly, glancing toward Grath, who stood now with his restraints removed, arms crossed, jaw tight, refusing to meet anyone's eyes directly. "He will remain angry for some time," I said honestly. "Pride does not release its grip easily." "And you," she asked, "what will you carry back?" I considered the question carefully before answering, because I understood it was not a small question, and it deserved more than a quick response. "I will carry back the truth," I said, "that my species built an entire threat classification around what a creature has, and never thought to ask what a creature has survived, that the absence of claws does not mean the absence of danger, that silence, when it comes from something patient, rather than something afraid, should frighten a hunter far more than noise ever could." Something flickered across Elena's face then, brief and unreadable, and for a moment I thought she might smile, though the expression passed before it could fully form. "That's more than I expected from a first encounter," she said. "It is more than I expected to learn," I admitted. Daniel returned Sira to us, then unharmed exactly as Elena had promised, though clearly shaken by an experience she would likely carry with her for a long time. Grath said nothing as our pod reassembled near the corridor we had first entered through, his silence heavier than any words could have been, and I understood that his journey toward understanding what had happened here would take considerably longer than mine had, if it ever fully arrived at all. "One more thing," Elena said, as we prepared to leave the station behind. "Tell your commanders that if they send another pod expecting the same easy clearing, they'll get the same result. We're not looking for a fight. We never were, but we've stopped being willing to disappear quietly just because someone decided in advance that we would." Lai carried those words back through the broken corridors of the station, past the silence that had once terrified me and now simply felt honest, out into the docking bay where our shuttle waited exactly as we had left it hours earlier, though it felt now like a lifetime had passed inside those walls. My report to command, when I finally delivered it, was met with the exact skepticism Daniel had predicted. Numbers were demanded, weapons counts, explanations that fit neatly into the categories our systems already understood. I gave them what I could, knowing it would never be enough to fully capture what I had witnessed, knowing that the Coalition's careful architecture of threat and classification would take far longer than one report to unravel and rebuild. But I also understood something else, something that settled into me quietly during the long journey back to the fleet and never fully left afterward. Every instinct in my body, honed across 1,000 generations of hunting, had recognized Elena and her people as something dangerous within the very first moments of encountering them, long before any weapon was drawn or any word was spoken. Our sensors had failed, our briefings had failed, our entire framework for measuring threat had failed. Only the oldest part of me, the part that existed before language and before technology, had gotten it right from the very beginning. We had spent generations learning to fear claws and venom and armor plating, certain that danger always announced itself through visible strength. We had never considered a species that survived not by being the strongest thing in any single moment, but by being the thing that simply never stopped, patient and calm and unafraid, until every advantage we thought we held had quietly worn itself away. I think about that station often now, and about Elena's calm voice in the darkness, and about the particular chill of watching an entire trained pod fall, one by one, to a woman who never raised her voice above a whisper. And I think about the itch that had crawled behind my eyes the moment we first stepped aboard, the ancient warning that had tried, in the only language it knew, to tell me the truth before anything else could. No armor, no noise. And yet somehow, in that single suspended heartbeat before everything changed, every true predator in that cargo bay had already known exactly what she was.